Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, it's nice to be back here. Feels like these last 2.5 years have felt kind of biblical. The never-ending pandemic and all of the political, social upheaval, the insurrection, climate change, the wildfires we've had, the floods in other parts of the country. So a lot of uncertainty, a lot of upheaval. And the Democrats maintain control of the Senate. So both of those things are true. We're all carrying a lot of stuff. You may have lost people during the pandemic. My mother died in 2019, right before the pandemic started, at the end of 2019. And it was only this year in May that we were able to hold a memorial service in person for her. And I know that many of you probably have similar stories. And, it occurs to me that when we're in times like these, either in a smaller scale in our personal lives or in a larger scale, the way things are going at this moment in history, that often what comes up is a sense of resistance. We don't want things to be this way. So this is the topic of my talk today, is resistance, or really aversion, right? I like the word resistance. For me, it has a sort of specificity that aversion doesn't connect with me in that way. And so I'm going to talk about the various ways that we can experience resistance, that I experience resistance both physically and mentally. And also, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, but I haven't really ever given a talk on it. And as I was developing this, excuse me, what came up for me also is that one of the ways in which we can hold resistance and aversion is through equanimity. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about equanimity. And in my experience, I've heard and even given a lot of talks on metta, on loving kindness, on the Brahmaviharas, on compassion. Not so much on mudita, on joy, and much less, it seems, on equanimity. And if anything, these times in my mind really require equanimity. I think equanimity is something that is needed at this time. One of the ways in which I experience resistance almost every day is through impatience. And I don't know how many of you have ever shopped at Costco, but Costco can be a real test. And depending on when you go, if they've got the food sample carts out, there's all kinds of knots and clusters of people blocking aisles and carts parked, and you can't get around and you can't get through things, and just a feeling of being impeded wherever you go. And of course, it's natural that if you just want to sort of get all your stuff and get out, to feel some impatience. And so that came up for me. I was there on Friday, and it was very busy. And then there's the issue of lines. You go to the cashier, and of course you evaluate, okay, which one's going to move the fastest, right? And then you choose one, and it turns out to be the wrong one because the customer's talking to the cashier about some problem with the payment, and they're standing there for 10 minutes, and you're judging yourself for choosing the wrong line. These are all forms of resistance, mental, emotional resistance that we experience every day. I will say one thing about my experience with Costco on Friday was that there were these moments of grace, and I was aware of my impatience as I was trying to rush in and rush out, because I usually don't like to spend a lot of time there. And one of them was, the inevitable two people come around the corner and you're sort of, okay, now what? Sort of get out of my way. And I waved these people through, and it was a Chinese gentleman and his wife, and she went by with this cart, and he went by and he said, "Thank you." And I was just like, "Thank you." And it was just this small moment where that resistance fell away. Because I was aware of my impatience in that moment. And I saw them not as an impediment to me, but as other human beings navigating this crazy environment. Then after I checked out, I was walking out with my stuff, and there were 4 Theravada monks in burnt orange robes standing at the membership desk. And I looked over, and one of them looked at me and smiled. And it was just suddenly, again, it was just this moment of grace. It's a human moment, because all of the rest of the resistance is just mental stuff. It really is. It doesn't feel like it. It feels really important when you're in it, but it's just kind of mental stuff. So that's my own personal little story of my struggle with impatience, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But I want to contextualize this, that resistance, as I said, is really just aversion. And aversion is one of the 3 unwholesome roots, right? One of the foundations of Buddhist thought. There's greed, aversion, and delusion. Right? And so greed is the attraction to what's pleasant, and aversion is the rejection of what's unpleasant. And I would suggest that we're continually navigating these 2 poles of attraction and aversion, of wanting and resistance, depending on the situation. And this can go on at gross and overt levels of anger, expressions, of emotion, or it can happen very subtly in the mind. And so again, I'll say a little bit more about that. But, in the mind, it's sort of like this movement toward what is pleasant and away from what is unpleasant. And this happens a lot. And you may be familiar with the teaching on Vedana, which is feeling tones. And feeling tones are basically, it's not like emotion. It's the fact that when we encounter something perceptually, is that there is an immediate evaluation of, oh, this is pleasant, or this is unpleasant, or neutral. So that's what the feeling tones are. Vedana is pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And that is an automatic thing that happens instantaneously in our mind. It can happen when we're just sitting in meditation and a thought comes up and it's a pleasant thought and there's this attraction to it. or an unpleasant thought and there's an aversion to it. But it also happens obviously in daily life too, and the actions that we take. Now I want to share this quote from a local teacher named Adyashanti about this idea, because, really aversion, resistance is about control. We want things to be a certain way, right? It's just natural. We want things to go smoothly, and when they don't, we're sort of like, ah. So Adyashanti says, what if you let go of every bit of control and every urge that you have, right down to the most infinitesimal urge to control anything, anywhere, including anything that may be happening with you at this moment? So that's a mouthful, and it's a pretty tall order, but it's an interesting thought. Like, what if we did let go of that urge to control? Even if just for a few seconds or a few moments. And that resistance or urge to control can come up as we're sitting in meditation. I mean, our bodies become uncomfortable, and we're like, oh, we want to adjust, we want something to stop. So I'm just going to frame this in two ways of how we typically experience resistance. One is physically through the body, and the other is through the mind, through our thoughts, projections. So the physical body, as I said, we may be sitting in meditation, we may feel pressure in our body, or discomfort, or pain in our shoulder, our knee, our back. We may experience contraction or tension, or just something in the body that just doesn't feel right. And again, to go back to this idea of Vedana, of unpleasant, is that when we, through our senses, experience the unpleasant, there's a pushing away, a contraction, a rejection. Mental, emotional, the same things happen. It's happening in our thoughts. And a lot of our suffering comes from our own habits of mind. Again, wanting things to be a specific way, or compulsive, reflexive thinking. So I made a list of resistances, and before I share them with you, I thought I would ask you, can you think of, I mentioned impatience and anger, can you think of any resistances that are sort of part of your, top 10 or top 5, things that are real in your life that come up for you? And just, if you get the urge, just say the word and out loud. And
traffic in the city. Physical pain.
Physical pain. Yeah. One of the things, as I'm sure you know, because you brought it up, is when we experience physical pain, we tense up. And when we tense up, it makes it worse. And one of the things that I will occasionally do with a patient working as a chaplain when they're experiencing pain is I will invite them to try doing some breathing. And the simple act of having them focus on the physical sensation of breath can help to mitigate, in some cases, some of the pain and discomfort they're feeling, because some of that pain and discomfort is coming from the resistance itself. Anything else?
Noisy neighbors.
Thank you.
Wanting negative criticism about myself just to stop.
Yes. Defensiveness. That's on my list. Is that, there's that, I've been doing different kinds of work for a long time where I've tried to, where feedback is encouraged, and I've tried to to develop the capacity to receive feedback without defensiveness. And it's really hard. No matter how valid the criticism, no matter how compassionately it's presented, there's almost always this sort of like, right? The minute you hear it coming, you're sort of, okay, here it comes. Like you tense up a little bit. Yeah, that's a big one.
Self-consciousness.
Self-consciousness, yes. And again, self-consciousness is about projecting how we think things should be and being afraid that we're not measuring up to that. Yeah, these are all great. And again, this is where a practice can really come alive, is when we allow ourselves to identify our own personal pressure points that we can begin to recognize and work with. So here's some other ones that I've got here. Irritation, anger, anxiety. And there's this thing that Trungpa Rinpoche, Pema Chodron talks about this too, being one of his prime students, is the ubiquitous anxiety. And that's the specific kind of dukkha or suffering that we just feel all the time. It's just sort of, it's like, you know, suffering is not necessarily a very good translation for dukkha, but what is a sense of sort of unsatisfactoriness. That we often feel that things aren't quite right, or they're not quite the way we would like them. So ubiquitous anxiety, the comparing mind. And this can tie in too with the self-consciousness, is because self-consciousness often carries with it a kind of valence of comparing. Views and opinions. Now, you know, what's been happening in this country ever since 2016 is, I would suggest, a prime example of the ways in which views and opinions can create all kinds of pain and strife and chaos. And, you know, it was something that the Buddha specifically warned about, was the attachment to views and opinions. And of course, now what we're seeing is just this extreme hardening around people's views and opinions, where they're not even talking the same language politically and socially. Impermanence. Again, one of the biggies, one of the three characteristics: suffering, impermanence, and no self. Right? We resist change. Earlier we were talking about Bagua, and the idea that Bagua is this Taoist circle walking practice used for meditation, but also used to try to condition the nervous system to change, because it involves walking in a circle and making quick changes of direction. And so in doing that, what you do, eventually you try to still the mind so that every time you change, it doesn't cause that resistance. Because impermanence, change, is extraordinarily difficult, whether it's on a big scale, you know, things like losing a job or a home, moving, you know, that kind of thing, the end of a relationship, or it's something much smaller, much more subtle. And impermanence means that everything changes. I've often been struck by the fact that things changing, we don't want good things to change, but we want bad things to change. And that's where the resistance is, right? The bad thing, oh, I want it to be different. The good thing, no, stay. You know, when I was going through a particularly hard point in my life that went on for a couple of years, it involved my son and custody and stuff like that, really painful stuff. I developed this mantra where I just said to myself, everything changes. Everything changes. And eventually it did, but it took about 3 years. But nothing stays the same. So for me, dealing with that sense of resistance and pain, that was my practice. Expectation. And I always think that expectation, you can't consider expectation without considering disappointment. Because disappointment is the fruit of expectation. When we expect things to be a certain way and they're not, oh shit, we resist. Trungpa Rinpoche had a very interesting thing to say about disappointment. He said, disappointment is a good sign of basic intelligence. It cannot be compared to anything else. It is sharp, precise, obvious, and direct. If we can open, then we can suddenly see that our expectations are irrelevant compared with the reality of the situation we're facing. And I love that. Our expectations are irrelevant in the face of the reality of what we're facing. And they really are. I mean, you can't convince yourself of that really intellectually, at least for very long, when you encounter these sorts of things in your life. But it's a good context, a good way of framing the ways in which we resist, the ways in which we want things to be different. We want them to be other than they are. And that, to me, is the nub of resistance. We just want things to be different. You know, a local teacher, Vinny Ferraro, he likes to say, right now it's like this. And again, it's kind of a nice pithy little mantra to kind of help cultivate a little bit more acceptance for the hard things that we experience, the impatience, the anger, the expectations. It's right now, it's like this. That idea of embracing the reality of what we're experiencing. And another favorite of mine is a quote, I think this is from Pema Chodron, give up all hope of an alternative to the present moment. and that again, I mean, that evokes laughter because there's recognition there, right? That's what we do. We hope that this present moment will somehow be difficult. I mean, will be different. We want it to be other than it is. We want it to conform to some ideal, a projection of the mind. So I've been experiencing some resistances lately that I've found kind of interesting. And one of them is that from playing music with a lot of bands over many years, loud bands, I have some tinnitus. So I have some difficulty hearing, especially when there's background noise. And, one of the things that has happened to me frequently lately is I like to listen to the radio. I listen to NPR as I'm driving and my window's open and a loud motorcycle will go by. And I'll miss like a whole chunk of what the commentator or the speaker was saying on the radio. And I'll be like, God damn it. And I have this sort of irritation and resistance to this guy on his Harley. Motorcycles. Jets passing overhead. We've at Laguna Honda with the volunteer program, we often sit outside in the garden to meditate and have our meeting, and a jet passes overhead, and again, I'll lose like a chunk of conversation because of the jet. So, that for me brings up aggravation and, just kind of like a resistance. And of course, I can't control that. I mean, I can ask someone to repeat themselves. I can't do that with the radio, but it's really about control. It's about me wanting things to be a certain way, and they're not. So in Buddhist terms, I don't know if you've heard this term or not, you probably haven't. This is the second arrow, right? Resistance is the second arrow. So let's say we stub our toe, right? And it hurts. But then immediately what we may do is, oh, who the fuck left that there? Or, oh, you stupid idiot. Like we impose some other judgment over it that actually increases our suffering. Or if we're feeling pain, we tense up, and the tension, the physical resistance, causes more suffering. So we add to our suffering by resisting. That's what the second arrow is about. We create another layer of suffering. So we may be recalling, let's say, an unpleasant conversation with someone, a conflict, disagreement we had with them, and we may get in that rut or cycle of playing it over and over again in our head. And that experience may have been unpleasant, but our resistance, our playing it in our head, is us trying to make it other than it was. And of course, it's already happened. So that resistance just adds another layer of suffering. It's like a big no. That's what resistance is, a big no. So how do we work with resistance and aversion? Some ways that we can maybe do it. The first, obviously, is to notice it. Is the power of noticing, is mindfulness. Oh, this is resistance. Sometimes just naming it, putting a label on it, is enough. It's like, oh, I'm really resisting this. And to just be in that experience of resisting, to recognize it and to acknowledge it. This is resistance. And in the body, we can do that by looking at, so let's say we're sitting in meditation and you start feeling discomfort, and maybe you start to try to adjust a little bit. And then you can start to notice, oh, where am I feeling tension? Or where is the contraction in my body? Because when we feel discomfort, like with pain, we will, by resisting it, we'll add another layer of tension. So now we've got two layers of tension. We've got the pain, and we've got the discomfort, and we've got the resistance, which creates another layer. So I like to ask myself, what am I feeling, and where am I feeling it? This is a very simple, somatic-centered way of seeing what's going on in the body. And so it may be, oh, I'm feeling this real contraction in my solar plexus, or I'm feeling a sense of collapsing or pressure in my chest. And I don't have to necessarily know why. I just have to feel the physical sensation that's occurring. And I think that's one of the things that why somatic practices can be so powerful, is because we do walk around. A lot of the tension that we feel in our bodies is created by the mind. And if we can just go directly into the body and just feel the physical sensation, sometimes that will start to loosen up a little bit. So we stay with the physical sensation. I have, over the past year or so, developed the habit of taking a cold shower in the morning. And I turn it as cold as I can get it, and I stay in there for about 90 seconds. And it's a very interesting practice. I mean, there are physical health benefits to doing this from the reading that I've done. But what's more interesting to me about it is the mental discipline. And of course, what I notice is as I'm getting ready to take my cold shower, I can feel that like I don't want to do it. And so I try to just work with that, and then I step into the shower, and when I step under the water, I try to relax my body. Because what's the first thing we do when we step into something unpleasant like a cold shower? It's like, oh, right? And so this is a way for me. I'm not suggesting you guys do this, but this can translate. This can translate to other things, right? This can translate to other situations in our life. Is when we feel that sense of, oh, somebody's going to tell me something critical about myself. You feel that defensiveness. It's just to see if you can just relax it, to relax into it, and to stay with the physical sensation. A lot of my Taoist practices, the Tai Chi and Qigong and Bagua and stuff, really works with energy. And so it's helpful to feel the energy in your body if you can. And one of the ways we can do that is just to notice vibration. I find vibration is actually a little easier to feel. Like you say energy and people are like, ooh, energy. But vibration is a very specific thing, and we can feel vibration in our body. It's not that hard. So, working as the body with energy. I want to leave time for questions and comments, so I'm going to skip a couple of things here. Thoughts have energy, though. If you, again, it's easiest to do this when you're meditating, but if you're sitting in meditation and, thoughts are constantly coming up, right? And sometimes we let them go, and sometimes we're like, ooh, I'm going to go with that one, and then we're off with it, right? But if we can notice that point of arising of the thoughts, we can feel that there's a certain energy to them. If it's an unpleasant thought, there's going to be that vibration of resistance. If it's a pleasant thought, it's going to be a kind of grasping for. And my experience has been that pleasant emotions, wholesome emotions, I'm trying to think of a better word, but anyway, emotions like joy, happiness, compassion, love are expansive. We will feel the sense of expansion when we experience joy, for instance, right? And when we experience irritation, anger, fear, anxiety, those will be contractive. And I think that's a useful framing, the contractive, expansive. And that really is noticing the way in which the energy of thoughts and emotions impact our minds. There's we have this thing called the 5 precepts at Zen Caregiving Project, and one of them is, these are just sort of little phrases that are guidelines for how we can think about things. It's welcome everything, push away nothing. And this is an invitation for acceptance, but I think acceptance is not really the right word, is because acceptance is kind of passive. If we welcome something, we're literally embracing it, right? And so welcoming everything is, again, not rejecting the present moment. We can't change it, right? Our expectations are irrelevant in the face of reality, so why not embrace the fact that in that moment, that is our reality? To make friends with the moment. Right now, it's like this. So let me say a few things about equanimity. I do want to just read this quote, though. This is from Eckhart Tolle. He says, "It may look as if a situation is creating the suffering, but ultimately this is not so. Your resistance is." So, if you don't take my word for it, you can take his. But what I would really suggest is that you find out for yourself and see how it works in your experience. So equanimity, I feel, is like a good way to hold these feelings of aversion or resistance. And equanimity, again, it's one of those words where people might have very different ideas of what it actually means. So I'm just going to read some different phrases, synonyms more or less. Non-attachment, non-discrimination, impartiality, tolerance. So those are sort of nibbling around the edges of what equanimity is. The root of the word it means over or all around is upa, and ik is to look and to see. So it's to have an oversight, to overlook or to see. In other words, to see the big picture. It's sometimes described as being from the top of the view from the top of a mountain. You're seeing things because when you get involved in something that's emotionally charged, our focus tends to narrow in on that one thing. So I think of equanimity as widening the lens, so that we're taking in more of the situation. There's more context to it. Gil Fronsdal talks about it as to see with patience. And it's sometimes described as grandmotherly love, which is quite nice. Putting yourself in another's shoes. So again, taking our view from here and changing the perspective so that we've got a broader context. Not taking sides. And not getting pulled one way or the other. Whether it's our thoughts, our minds constantly moving towards things that are pleasant or pushing away things that are unpleasant, is if we can break that cycle of being pulled into or away from something and just stay in the middle. To me, that's equanimity. And it doesn't matter what the situation is. It's not going toward or away. I also have a practice of, when I get caught in these mind states, is that I'll remind myself that this is suffering. I'll just say that to myself. This is suffering. Because it's so easy to spin out, right? And we just get caught in these thought patterns. But I find for me that helps to interrupt the spinning out, the thought patterns. Is, oh, this is suffering. I'm doing this. I'm creating this suffering. And I'll sometimes ask myself, what else is here? So I might be driving and I might be ruminating on something, and I'll just be, what else is here? It's like, well, oh, geez, it's a really nice day. Look at that blue sky. And is that a hawk? And it's like suddenly you've widened the lens. You've created a larger context. So it's this sort of contraction and expansion. Raise the gaze. That's a phrase that came to me. Because we can walk around with our eyes on the ground right in front of us, right? Or we can look up and we can see the world around us. And I think that's kind of a quality of equanimity, is we look up and we see everything around us. Oh, there's other suffering beings. Oh, that Chinese man and his wife, they're navigating Costco too, and they're just trying to get around this corner. It's a larger context. So we embrace things the way they are because we actually don't have a choice, right? I mean, we can resist, but it's not going to change the way things are. Now, there are some things that we can change, but this is much more on a basic level of just our constant resisting of things that maybe we can't change, like rain or bad weather. We may wake up and see it's raining and be like, oh shit. right? Or, I got to drive in that traffic. For those of you who've heard me speak before, you know that driving is it's a bugaboo for me, right? It's a tough one. It's a hard practice for me because I get impatient and I get irritated. And this is San Francisco. It's congested. It's busy. It's densely populated, and there's always something slowing you down. If you're in a hurry, if you're late, oh man, that's even worse. So, give up all hope of an alternative to the present moment. And here's one other quote from Eckhart Tolle that I like. He says, "Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as though you had chosen it. Always work with it, not against it." And again, that gets back to this idea of embracing. Accept it as if you had chosen it. It's not just passive accepting. It's like, okay, I'm going to embrace this moment. There's a Zen phrase that comes up, just this. Just this. Nothing added. Because, again, with the second arrow, we'll have an experience, and then we'll lay something on top of it, the resistance, the judgment, the fear, and now we're adding something. So just this, nothing added. Don't add the other stuff. Don't add the second arrow. Just allow yourself to be with whatever's in the way. So I see that we're getting close to time, and like I said, I want to have time for questions and comments. So I'm just going to read a poem, if I may. And this is by someone named Alison Luderman. And the title of the poem is, "Even the word obstacle is an obstacle." Try to love everything that gets in your way. The Chinese women in flowered bathing caps murmuring together in Mandarin, doing leg exercises in your lane while you execute 36 furious laps, one for every item on your to-do list. The heavy-bellied man who goes thrashing through the water like a horse with a harpoon stuck in its side, whose breathless tsunamis rock you from your course. Teachers, all. Learn to be small and swim through obstacles like a minnow without grudges or memory. Dart toward your goal, sperm to egg, thinking obstacle is another obstacle. Try to love the teenage girl idly lounging against the ladder, showing off her new tattoo. Sa vie est la mienne. This life is mine. In thick blue-black letters on her ivory instep. Be glad she will have to look at that all her life, and keep going, keep going. Swim by an uncle in the next lane next to yours who is teaching his nephew how to hold his breath underwater, even though kids aren't allowed at this hour. Someday, years from now, this boy who is kicking and flailing in the exact place you want to touch and turn will be a young man at a wedding on a boat, raising his champagne glass in a toast when a huge wave hits, washing everyone overboard. He'll come up coughing and spitting like he is now, but he'll come up like a cork, alive. So your moment of impatience must bow in service to a larger story, because if something is in your way, it is going your way, the way of all beings towards darkness, towards light. So, thank you for your attention, and we have a little bit of time for any questions or comments about this topic.
Yeah. Wonderful talk. Thank you very much. I was born to resist.
As are we all.
Once I was on a private Grand Canyon rowing trip, and when I signed up, I thought we would all be sharing the oars, but when we got there, we were having to use the big oars alone, and I just thought this was a really bad idea for amateurs to be doing this. And there were these big waves in the ocean, in the river, and one of the more experienced people said, "Are you a body surfer?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "That's your problem. You think the waves are coming at you, when in fact you're in the flow over the rocks." It was a completely different reframing of the phenomenon, and I'm going to try and remember that I knew that once. So thank you. It's a very seminal talk. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect example of widening the lens, right? As you recontextualized something that you were resisting and you found out, oh, it's not what I thought at all. Your expectations were actually incorrect. Yeah, beautiful.
Online is a question. Go
Yes.
ahead.
I really enjoyed your talk. I had an odd thought during your talk, which actually you identified in the poem you read, which had the line, try to love everything in your way. I was thinking, what if we add a little masochism to our being and learn to enjoy the badness? I'm not talking sexually now, okay?
No. Well, I think that we often resist things out of a conditioning in our mind. And like you say, if we just accept that we're going through something in that moment, that absolutely makes it easier. Can we enjoy it? Maybe. I don't know. I think it probably depends on each individual temperament. But certainly the suggestion that we not resist it, that we just embrace it, is definitely, it's definitely, I think, the right approach.
We just shouldn't use the word masochism when we say that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, you could say also that life is kind of an exercise in masochism. I'm sorry. Yes, please.
I'm going through a really hard time with my job now, and I know I make it worse by judging myself. But over the weekend, like I start out Friday night, Saturday, I'm just having, it's like, oh, I have time off work. I don't think about it. And as the weekend progresses, I start to think about it and go, I'm going to have to be there Monday, and I'm going to be so afraid. I get afraid and anxious. And so I just like automatically, and the thought is, well, if I think about that, I'm going to feel worse. So I don't know. It's like, I guess you're saying just go, oh, I'm feeling anxiety now.
I think the first step is always to notice it, to recognize it, and to acknowledge it, to accept that this is happening. It's like, of course you're going to feel that way. Why wouldn't you? It sounds like work is pretty shitty for you right now. Yeah, not all of us, are going to want to have to go through something bad every week. So, that's all I just think the first thing is just to acknowledge it.
And to think, oh, I'm pushing away.
Yeah, to notice what that's creating, because you haven't gotten to work yet, right? So it's an expectation. And so in that sense, it could be, thought of as a second arrow.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. You could just accept the fact that maybe you're going to suffer at work enough and you don't have to pre-suffer.
Steve
Yeah.
online has had his hand up. Steve?
Yeah, just a simple question. Would you please repeat the title of the poem that you read?
Oh, certainly. It is I believe it's even the word obstacle is an obstacle. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Please.
Yes. One thing I notice is that it's somewhat possible for me in meditation to observe a feeling tone. But in real life, I think what comes up more is that before I even get a chance to observe a feeling tone, I just tend automatically to withdraw from anything that's unpleasant and to just sort of retreat. And that's kind of my instinctive response. and that kind of prevents dealing with reactions and with pushing away that I withdraw. It's not a skillful way to deal necessarily, but it, I guess it too benefits from awareness at those rare moments when I have it.
Yeah, if you can, find a little mantra like the ones that I, use for myself. This is suffering, or what else is here? Something that allows you a little bit of separation. But this is also, I think, one of the reasons that we meditate, is because it develops that habit of mind, so that when we're in the much more challenging environment situation of the real world in our daily lives, that habit starts to come out more readily. But I think, it's always a practice, every day.
All right, we should probably wrap up. Any final questions?
Yes, Cass.
It occurs to me that a lot of gay people have gone through kind of a process of embracing a moment at that period in our lives when we kind of discovered that we were gay, and had to overcome all the fear and anxiety and resistance to that and embrace it. And that in doing that act of embracing, I think it's a form of empowerment. It's not just, doesn't get you just to equanimity. It kind of takes you to empowerment in the same way that the queer community saying, yes, I am a fag, yes, I am queer, can empower ourselves when, in the process of acceptance, self-acceptance.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a beautiful way to end. Thank you all.